Congressman Thomas Massie is threatening to go with what he calls the nuclear option for his Epstein Files Transparency Act.
The Kentucky representative has been pushing for the Department of Justice to release more of the redacted names in the files, and he suggested that if they don't, he could take it upon himself to read off some of the names directly from the House floor. Here he was on CNN.
You had told me before that you may go to the floor and actually read the names of people on the alleged Epstein client list. Are you still planning to do that?
I'm ready to do that if the victims want me to. They believe that the best way to get justice is to force the DOJ to release these names.
This comes as members of Congress are set to begin personally reviewing the unredacted documents on Monday. These are versions of the documents that were previously available only to the DOJ. The Epstein Files Transparency Act, written by Massie and Democrat Ro Khanna, does allow for some redactions to be made, mainly to protect the identities of victims. But Massie and others have insisted that the DOJ's redactions are excessive. The DOJ says in a statement, "We are confident that this review will further demonstrate the department's good faith work to appropriately process enormous amounts of documents in a very short time."
One notable name that's come up with the release of the files is Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick. He's claimed that his interactions with Epstein were minimal, but some are disputing that after the newly released documents. And some lawmakers are urging Lutnick to resign, including Massie. Let's take a look.
Howard Lutnick clearly went to the island, if we believe what's in these files. He was in business with Jeffrey Epstein, and this was many years after Jeffrey Epstein was convicted, lightly sentenced, but was convicted for sexual crimes. So he's got a lot to answer for, but really he should make life easier on the president, frankly, and just resign.
A New York Times analysis of the documents found Lutnick and Epstein were not portrayed as having a close friendship, but rather that they were part of a similar business circle and became acquainted with each other when they were neighbors in Manhattan. Lutnick's Commerce Department has responded to the allegations with a statement saying this is nothing more than a failing attempt by the legacy media to distract from the administration's accomplishments, including securing trillions of dollars in investments, delivering historic trade deals, and fighting for the American worker. Secretary Lutnick had limited interactions with Mr. Epstein in the presence of his wife and has never been accused of wrongdoing.
Why is everything a distraction? Like, we can talk about two things. You always talk about this. We can work on two things at once. Epstein files can be released in full, and Congress should review them and see all the stuff that's not redacted so that they can understand who may be the same people that may be tied to this ring that you want to find out about. The victims are calling for this. He said if the victims want him to name the people on the floor, he will, where he's protected and can do that. And maybe that'll bring some justice to them. It's not up to us to tell victims how to come to peace or when to speak up. Or yes, I believe that if they feel confident enough, they should name other names if these should be convicted felons. Let's name them. But if they're not comfortable doing that for some reason, then let Congress do it. They have the unredacted names. Thomas Massie's at the head of this. He's a Republican. He wants to push this forward. So all that talk about this being one-sided and a political party trying to attack Trump, we're talking about larger than Trump. Even if we step back just from the sex trafficking claims, we're talking about the fact that people are still connected to somebody who's a convicted pedophile, who's been convicted of a bunch of egregious acts, and you're still keeping close relationships with them. So don't say that we're deflecting now from the huge accomplishments of the administration. No, explain why that's still your good friend. Explain why you have so many business ties with somebody who's...
He denies that they were good friends.
Right, but so, I mean, Elon Musk denies that. He says he barely knew Epstein, but then was allegedly asking, when can I get an invite over there? So a lot of people are not telling us the truth. And so I think people are just looking for real answers and the truth. I mean, some of the redacted emails, like one that I saw was like something about a fun night with somebody young, and they didn't say whom it was from. And young could be anything, right? Young could be 21, but it's still the point of like, why does that name get redacted? That's protecting the victim? Because it didn't say a name in that email. And so there's so many files, like you said, 3 million still that haven't come out, but tons that are redacted that have come out. Who are these people that are saying that was a fun night? Like, explaining it, and they're saying...
That's a crime now?
No, but a young girl is the crime, depending how young. So that's something worth looking into. You said you want to connect the dots for a ring. Well, things like that can't just go and say, well, they got redacted, that we didn't see any merit there. Like, we'll let Congress actually do its job for once and review this stuff and see what makes sense.
I think the victims could just make this a lot easier and just tell us who did it other than Epstein. Why do we have to jump through all these hoops to release, that are now releasing investigative records that contain false accusations, names of people who are not involved, a flood of smears,
Well,
gossip.
they're not false. They're just not corroborated. The FBI hadn't looked into them.
Some of
but
them
they're
are
not-
explicitly disproven. Like I saw this, excuse me, too much singing along with Bad Bunny this weekend, I guess. For instance, I saw Democrats claiming last week that the files demonstrate that Trump and Melania were introduced to each other by Epstein, because that accusation appears in the files. An investigator wrote, I spoke to witness X. Witness X told me Epstein introduced them, and that's being taken as fact. But actually, just the information that witness gave the investigator is just wrong. It has been disproven. We know that Epstein did not introduce them. It doesn't fit the timeline. Trump got Michael Wolff and the Daily Beast to take down the claim because it was libelous. So just because it appears someone said it, it has been disproven. But that is now out there again because they released this file. Do you see why this is? I'm shocked, frankly.
By me.
Democrats who are not more worked up about misinformation online all the time thought this was a good idea.
Yeah,
Dumping 3 million pages of notes of investigations, many of which were debunked.
I certainly think, like you said, there are a lot of people, unfortunately, and reputation-wise, this is a huge problem that may catch strays. Like I gave the example of Russell Wilson, who's like, what are you talking about? I was buying a plane from a random person. I didn't know it ever was owned by Epstein. Don't even put me in. I never even bought the plane. So that's the only connection. But now my name's appearing in these files. So yes, some of that actually is true. But when there's people who repeatedly show up, or people who seem like they have deeper ties to him, people that can answer questions about why money was given to him, why he was protected, why he operated with so much impunity, these are the same questions that I just keep telling you people want answers to. So if the victims are the focus, right? And you made a mistake. You kept bad company. All right, so you're going to have to catch an L in this moment. But the victims are the focus, and they are asking for these names to be released, and they're the ones who stand to be the most humiliated or the most embarrassed by this. Well, then we need to go forward and provide some type of solace for these victims and get some real answers so that this can never happen again. That's the whole point, is that we can never have this happen again.
Okay, but people keep saying like that not a lot is known and that there's unanswered questions. There actually are already answers to a lot of these questions. The reason Jeffrey Epstein got what seemed like a light sentence at the time is that the victims did not participate with law enforcement because they did not at that time, by and large, see themselves as victims. There was not enough evidence to convict him of he got convicted of basically prostitution rather than pedophilia because they could not get the women who were 16 or 17 to cooperate. Eventually, Virginia Giuffre, who was an adult at the time of these accusations, she was over the age of consent, she then came up with more sensational accusations of force and coercion involving additional people, including Prince Andrew and even Alan Dershowitz, that she then recanted parts of those testimonies and is not considered a completely credible person. So that is the totality of the circumstances. So then a question becomes, and then these victims, years later, when a fund gets set up to disperse millions of the Epstein estate's dollars to people who suddenly reinterpret what at the time they said was not, that they had not been victimized.
Well, several funds.
Let me finish. To reinterpret that as trauma in exchange for millions of dollars for them and their attorneys, then their stories all changed. I find that suggestive and notable, and so that's why I don't find them to be automatically credible people. When your story changes dramatically over the course of time, when you're paid more money to change your story, that raises my skepticism. Now, I'm not saying I will dismiss what they have to say out of hand. What I'm saying is, well, then I need you to go ahead and tell me you're insinuating that there's all these other people involved, but I don't even know if I believe you in the first place. I don't know that I disbelieve you, but I can't just take your word for it that there's all these other people involved when you've all changed your story several times.
Well, I'm not.
Is that fair?
The fair part is that they should come forward and say who else was involved. That's the part that I'll agree with you. The other part about the timeline of how adjacent or close they were to a young age and speaking up sooner, telling a woman who has been victimized when is a good time to speak up is not a good thing. When you strap yourself up with a lawyer that probably was attached to a lot of these women after JP Morgan and other banks decided to pay out because they know that being tied to Epstein and the way he moved his money was considered egregious, and it probably is cheaper just to pay people out, and these lawsuits were settled. If you have a lawyer that then comes and finds you and tells you, hey, you're entitled to these things, I'm not saying that these women are wrong for accepting what they're entitled to because they were found to have egregious acts going on. They were found that they were complicit in providing the way that he can move around his money like that. And so if people accepted that, that does not mean that they're a liar. That means that they accepted money. But why does that have to do, like there was a lawsuit that maybe some of these women were not even a part of the suing, right? They were just a part of, okay, whoever sued on behalf of all of the victims got the victims to step up and say, okay, we would like to be paid out because there's nothing else we can do. At this point, Jeffrey Epstein is dead. At this point, there's nothing we can do more to get our humanity back. There's nothing. And so the least we can do is feel like we have some semblance of normalcy and just get back to our life with our children and all this stuff. And so sometimes, many times, paying people out in claims is just how things are handled. Whether you think it's right or wrong, that's just how things are handled. So the fact that
I
they
wasn't
cannot
saying whether it's right or wrong.
You're basically saying that they can't speak because they got paid. You always say,
no,
like,
I'm
oh,
not
you got
saying they
paid
can't
up,
speak.
so why?
I'm explaining my reticence to accept what they have to say without evidence. Why I won't do that. Because I can only approach this as not as like a therapy, trauma coach or an attorney. I am processing this as a journalist, as someone who's trying to get to the truth of something, who has interviewed sources and for stories and how it's our job to present people's stories. If we trust and believe them, we try to verify them, and then we're giving our impression, and people watch us and read us is because they generally trust our perspectives. And I'm saying I cannot vouch for this perspective because they have changed their minds over time. I'm not saying that doesn't entitle them to anything or that they're liars, but why I cannot automatically accept what you say if you've changed what you say over time, particularly because you faced financial pressure to do. You got a windfall reward for changing your mind.
I love that
Is
you
that
said
fair?
that. Yes, I love that you said that, but I also cannot accept in the same way what the DOJ says and what the administration says when they've told us several different things that have not proven to be accurate, like a client list being on the desk that actually they're saying is not true, and like the fact that, like I said, CBS is reporting that somebody may have been inside of the jail cell of Jeffrey Epstein, and so we were told that this was a suicide, but we're not getting all the information. So when you're misreporting information, putting on my journalist hat, people have questions about why this man and his death is so elusive. Who's being protected still? What is the issue here? Because there's not going to be all this smoke and no fire whatsoever. I'm not buying that. I'm not buying that we should just take what the government says as law. Just like you're not buying that maybe we shouldn't take what all the victims say as law. But I think that it's worth releasing the information. If the government's redacting too many names,
I'm not taking everything the government said as well.
Massie and everybody to
when the
uncover
government
what
said
those
they had the
names say.
client list on their desk, they were lying because there is no such document. There's no such thing.
Or maybe there's not one now.
But there's no. But
because they don't want there to be one.
The framing of client list was the list of people who were abusing children provided to them by Jeffrey Epstein.
Right, and now it's
We have
magically
no evidence of
disappeared.
this.
I know, now it's magically disappeared and all these
Or
names are redacted.
there's no such thing.
Okay, but I'm not taking the government's word for it. So in the same way, we should ask questions about this because we're not just going to sweep it under the rug and say, oh, looks funny, but we'll let it go. I don't think anybody's ready to do that.
Okay. Next up, Georgia Senator John Ossoff was praised by Democrats for a campaign speech over the weekend, but Republicans accused him of hypocrisy. We'll be right back.